Hello. During this session, we're going to be covering some information that I know is going to help you grow your knowledge when it comes to Black history. In this session, I'm going to give you 5 locations and 5 books that will help you enhance your knowledge in Black history, regardless if you were a baby boomer that was born in 1960, if you are a part of Gen Z, if you're a millennial, Gen X, or regardless. If you take advantage of the information that I'm going to share with you, you're going to find that your knowledge is going to be more enhanced. And that's the goal. So, in order to do this, I want to make sure that I let you know why I'm in what I consider to be a great position in life to be able to share this kind of information with you. And so, we're going to start here. Okay. We're going to start with my name. My name is Kevin Zimmerman. And as you look at me, anyone should ask the question, how did a Black man end up with the last name Zimmerman? I wondered that myself as I got of a certain amount of years when I was growing up. And so I did some research. And what I came to find out through asking my grandparents and my parents, and then doing some research and seeing the documentation, is my fifth generation grandparents were born on a slave plantation. And in those days, when you were born on a slave plantation, you took on the name of the plantation owner. In addition to that, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Now, why is that significant? Well, Toledo, Ohio is 40 minutes from Detroit, Michigan. And Detroit, Michigan was one of the destinations that Black Americans fled to during the Great Migration. The Great Migration took place in 2 waves. It started in the 1914s, 15s, and went through 1940s, and then again in the 1940s up into the 1970s. Well, in the between the 1914 and the 1914 and 1915 era up to 1940, Detroit, Chicago, and New York were destinations where they fled the Jim Crow South for a better opportunity during the Industrial Revolution. My grandparents were a part of that flood in the Great Migration. And then I went to the school that you see on the screen right now, Tennessee State University. Now, it was there at Tennessee State that I got a spark to start digging into Black history. One of the reasons why, or a primary reason why, is because there were conversations that were being had, studies that were being conducted, that I did not have access to the information, although it was supposed to be under the umbrella of history. But Tennessee State enlightened me on information about the plight of Blacks in America, in American history, that had been negated all the way through my elementary school years and my high school years. There was information that I did not obtain regarding the plight of Blacks in America until I got to Tennessee State. Which brings me to making a very good point. Isn't it interesting when we want to learn something about law, we gravitate to law schools to find out the information that we feel that we need to know to substantiate the facts when it comes to law. For example, we hear Yale Law School often mentioned. When we want to learn about engineering, we gravitate to a school of engineering in order to validate information to support facts about engineering, such as the University of Purdue in Ohio. But when we want to learn about Black history, I find it interesting that I don't hear, and I don't have enough to say that I could substantiate that the conversations aren't being had, but I don't hear enough information encouraging people to engage with HBCUs in order to obtain the substantial evidence regarding Black history. And here's the thing. There is probably an HBCU within reach of you. When I say within reach, is regardless of where you live. With the information age, and we have laptop computers, desktop computers, cell phones, you are able to access that institution and inquire about information regarding Black history. So I want to encourage everyone to consider doing that going forward if you haven't done that already. HBCUs have a plethora amount of information that can enlighten America regarding the plight of Blacks in America if only we would access it. Now, with that being said, I'm going to start with the places that I want to encourage that you consider visiting in order to grow your knowledge when it comes to Black history. Now, the first place I'm going to name is the Smithsonian Institute's National Museum of African American History and Culture. And as a matter of fact, each one of these places that I'm going to recommend that you go to, I have visited there myself. So I'm only going to be sharing with you information about places that I have gone and found to be extremely beneficial when it comes to growing in knowledge regarding Black history. So, why did I start here? Why did I start with the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture? I started here because it covers an arc of Black history, beginning with the transatlantic slave trade that happened during the 15th and the 16th century, and it extends up until the present day. That's why I say that there is a good starting place when you want to learn information in its totality about the plight of Blacks in America when it comes to Black history. That is an excellent museum to attend. And I also want to suggest this to you. It would be a great family trip for everybody. If you got the family together and you went there and you and your family had an opportunity to experience the Smithsonian. When you get to that area, we all know that in anywhere when you head east, especially the northern capital region like Washington, D.C., those places are expensive. But guess what? They have inexpensive locations where you and your family can stay and then go visit the museum, and you will have an experience there that would absolutely blow your mind. I highly encourage that if you haven't considered taking your family to this museum, that you strongly consider doing so. Now, I'm also a realist, and I understand that some people are not in position to simply go to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. But what you have access to is online capabilities. So if you get an opportunity, go online and go to and see what the Smithsonian Institution has to offer. And if you do that, you'll find that there is a plethora amount of information that will benefit you if you would only access it. So again, we're starting with the Smithsonian because the Smithsonian Institution is going to offer you a arc of information when it comes to Black history, beginning with the transatlantic slave trade, and it's going to bring you all the way up to the current day in time. Now, what I also want to encourage you to do is as you're listening to me share this information, I would be interested if you could go ahead and put in the comments, where did you learn your information about Black history? Once again, if you could just take a few minutes and share with me, where did you learn your information about Black history? Because that would be interesting. And I say that because as I've traveled all across the United States, and I've been to 47 of the 50 states in the United States, what I've come to learn is depending upon the region, it shares or it sheds some light on what information is shared regarding Black history. Now, the second place I highly encourage you to go to grow in knowledge of Black history is this location right here. The Legacy Museum that is in Montgomery, Alabama. The Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama will absolutely blow your mind. But the reason I say go to the Legacy Museum is because the time period that you're going to be engaged to at the Legacy Museum is going to be the years examined, 12 years examined between the period after the Civil War, when the newly freed slaves became, American citizens that could briefly engage in the political process and the job market. And that museum is powerful in its ability to share with us that information. So as you notice, I started with the Smithsonian that went from the transatlantic slave trade all the way up to the current day. And now I'm telling you the second place I highly encourage is the Legacy Museum, because it's going to cover that 12-year period of time where after the Civil War, when we were able, during what's considered Reconstruction, which was a time that we were able to take part in political and social programs that could engage or adopt us into American society. And the Legacy Museum does a wonderful job sharing that information. It also does a wonderful job in sharing the establishment of white supremacist control that shaped the country's future. And that's important to know. As we look at current climates and we assess past climates, we cannot escape what happened during that time period that Reconstruction took place and Reconstruction ended and Jim Crow began. We can't escape that period. And the Legacy Museum does an excellent job in exhibiting information that gives us the knowledge about that period. Now, also at the Legacy Museum is probably one of the most powerful memorials that I've ever witnessed in my life. And they have what is called a memorial to the lynching victims that were died during that period. And nearly 2,000 people were lynched during that period, after Reconstruction and during Jim Crow. And the Legacy Museum has a museum where they have iron ores or structures that hang above head, and they have the location or the county and the dates, I believe, where people had been lynched, and it gives honor and homage to those people that some probably had forgotten about, but the Legacy Museum have not. And guess what? It is a living display. So the more they learn about what took place there, they support that by hanging one of those iron pillars up there for you to be able to witness. Why is that powerful? It's powerful because during that period, nearly 2,000 Black people were lynched that were, and hear me, accounted for. So one would ask, why is that relevant today? And I want to ask this question. Do you know when lynching became a federal crime in the United States? Once again, you ask why I'm placing emphasis here, and I'm going to ask if you know when lynching became a federal crime in the United States. And that's important because often we hear things like, those things happened back then. Those things aren't happening now. But I beg to differ to a degree. And I tell you why. The answer is lynching did not become a federal crime in the United States until the passing of the Emmett Till Antilynching Act on March the 29th, listen to me, 2022. Again, lynching did not become a federal crime until the passing of the Emmett Till Act, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, on March the 29th, 2022. That was only less than 4 years ago. We're only in 2026. You see, lynching was considered illegal under states' rights, but the federal government could not supersede the states' rights to hold states responsible for rendering the appropriate degree of justice until March the 29th, 2026. So just go ahead and keep that in your back pocket. Anytime you hear someone say things like, well, you know, what happened back then are not the things that are taking place today, you can say, I beg to differ. We have come a long way, but it appears that to some degree, we're heading backwards. So that is going to be the Legacy Museum that is in Montgomery, Alabama. The next museum that I would encourage that you take time out to go to or take your family to on a visit would be the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, why do I say the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee? If you were here when we started the live stream, we started with the Smithsonian Institute of Smithsonian Institution of African American History and Culture, and we said that in that institution, you're going to get the history starting from the transatlantic slave trade all the way up through the current period. Then the second place we told you to go to was the museum in Montgomery, Alabama, the previous museum that I just showed, the Legacy Museum. And in that museum, they're going to cover the period after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, and what took place after Reconstruction ended, and there was the establishment of white supremacy in America during that period of time that shaped the future of America today. Well, then during that period, what took place? We saw an uprise of what was called the Civil Rights Movement. And that's where we come to this museum, the National Civil Rights Museum, because it covers the area from slavery through the Civil Rights era. And it is housed in the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. So it is a great, great place to take you and your family to visit, to learn so much information. And it has a powerful impact upon you if you ever take the opportunity to do so. And I encourage that you do. If you go there, you will not have any regrets. All of these museums that I'm sharing with you have interactive abilities for you to engage, not just go and look or you just go and read, but they have interactive displays where you can take part physically in the learning process. Also, the museums that I have laid out for you have online access. So if you're unable to get physically to these locations, that does not mean that you don't have access to the information that's at these museums. Okay. So I would highly encourage that you attend these museums when you got an opportunity to do so. Now, there is another museum that I'm going to mention, but I did not put it on the screen because that museum is tied into Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As well. And that's the National Center of Civil Rights and Human Rights Museum that's in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, but the key thing about that museum is this. It connects the history of the United States civil rights movement with the global struggle for human rights. Okay, so the museum that's in Atlanta is going to connect the history of the United States civil rights movement with the global struggle of human rights issues. So there's going to be one more place that I am going to identify for you, but I'm going to save that place for the last display in our live stream. Okay. The books that I would highly recommend that you take into consideration is going to be starting with this one, The 1619 Project, that was written by Nikole Hannah-Jones. If you don't have this book in your library, I highly encourage that you do so. Okay, I highly encourage that you do so because what she did in the 1619 project was she centered the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans into the theme of the book. And she argues that it was in 1619 that was the year that the enslaved Africans landed in Virginia should be the nation's true founding when it talks about our history. And if anyone ever wants to question why that position isn't valid, I ask you this question. We all went to school and we learned about the arrival of the Mayflower and the Pilgrims and Thanksgiving and all of that good stuff, correct? I'm sure you'll agree with me. But I want you to know that the White Lion landed in Virginia in 1619. Did you know that the Mayflower landed over a year later in November 1920? So that tells you right there that there's information that's within the American school system that has been left out for us to be able to grasp a full knowledge of the plight of Blacks in America. The next book I recommend is going to be this book here, Systems That Shaped Black America. This is one of my favorite. It is a small book, but it can be done in a 40-day period. It journeys chattel slavery up into modern day, and it has many lessons along the way. It's not very thick, and one of the best simplified versions that I've ever read that will be able to enhance anybody's knowledge when it comes to Black history. And it's called Systems That Shaped America. Now, 1619 Project by Nikole Hannah-Jones is not only in hardback, but it's also on audiobook. This book here is a hard copy where you can get it, in book form, but it's on ebook. It may not be available. Last I checked, it wasn't available when it came to audiobook, but it is available on ebook. Okay. The next book that I'm going to recommend is 400 Souls by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blain. And the reason I feel that this book is extremely beneficial for those that want to learn Black history is because it collaborates over 400 years of history that's told by 90 different diverse writers when it comes to Black history. So you can see that you're not just being drawn into the ideas of one individual, but now we're talking about multiple individuals. 90 different diverse Black writers contributed to the knowledge that could be provided in this book. And I think that it will be very, very beneficial for anybody that wants to learn Black history. The next book I'm going to recommend that you consider is called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And the good thing about The Warmth of the Sun is this is a book that kind of touches bases, well, not kind of, it does touch base on what I shared with you in my introduction to you when I talked about the Great Migration. And that's exactly what this book covers. It covers information from the time that Blacks fled the Jim Crow South north in 1914, 1915 up to 1940, and then from 1940 up until 1970, when they fled the Jim Crow South, going north in order for better opportunity. Okay, and that book is called The Warmth of Other Suns. But one of the most powerful books that I highly recommend anybody to read is called The Color of Law. By Richard Rothstein, if you read The Color of Law, you will see a comprehensive book on redlining and its meticulous documentation of the federal, state, and local governments active in engineering of residential segregation throughout, and it was done by way of policy. Once again, it's comprehensive in its meticulous documentation of federal, state, and local governments actively engineering residential segregation through policy. And that will give you an idea when you see people talking about the ghetto. Well, how did the ghetto even get there? Now, I did say that I was going to share one more with you at the end of the book when it comes to the museum. But this one I saved for last because guess what? It's not open yet, but it will be come June the 19th of this year, 2026. And that's going to be the President Barack Obama's Presidential Library in Chicago, Illinois. And it's going to cover his life and his time during the presidency. And we're talking about the first presidential library for the first Black president of the United States. My wife, Mari, and I are already planning to go. We've already booked our hotel and we've touched bases with some friends. And the friend said, you know what, we're going to meet you there. So listen, there are 4 places that I've given you that can provide some very sound information to enhance your knowledge on Black history, regardless if you're a beginner just wanting to learn or if you're well astute in Black history. These locations can only enhance your knowledge regarding the subject. I've also given you 5 books that will cover certain periods of the plights of Blacks in America. And it will also shape why we see some of the things that we see today. You know, I find it amazing that here we are in 2026, and we're still having conversations about rolling back civil rights. We're still having conversations about why we even have civil rights in the first place. But one thing I know that you can have, and you will have if you use what I just provided for you, and that's the true unwhitewashed version of Black history, which is American history. Take care.